All right. Welcome, everybody, to the Unizin Summit, as well as our talk today on data sources for operations support, finding your sweet spot, a case study. With me today is Jim Hart, Senior Developer, Luke Oldenburg, Senior LMS Admin, and myself, I'm Jeff Weber. I'm the service owner for the team we'll be talking about. And this is a situation that's been playing out at the University of Minnesota. It's something we're living on a day-to-day basis, choosing the right data sources for where we want to go. We want to share that with you. We want to make this session as participative as possible, so we encourage you to use the chat for comments and questions, and we'll try to address them as we go through the presentation. If not, we'll be sure to catch up to them at the end. So we'll get started. A little bit about the University of Minnesota. We've been around for a long time. We're a state land grant university, as well as a primary research university. We do have 5 campuses, the largest of which has more than 50,000 students in the Twin Cities. And we do have 4 other campuses that you see the names there that are spread out throughout the state. Love to have you visit sometime. And thank you for letting me take this little commercial break. Getting back to our presentation. For more context, we're talking about the academic technology tools team in which we're members of, and we're responsible for the central LMS, Canvas, and those tools that integrate with it. Our team is made up of 5 LMS admins or business analysts, along with 3 developers. As a team, we've been pursuing Agile as an approach to work, as well as scaled Agile for about the last year. So that gives you a little bit more about how we're organized. So let's just talk, why in the world do we care about data source selection, and why should we spend any time on it? Well, I'd like to argue that it's essential to achieving your project goals. It's possible for you to not spend any time on it, just choose what you're used to using and driving ahead, and you might be successful. But I'm going to argue that a little bit of time spent up front to understand what the strengths and the weaknesses of the choices you have, as well as what you know you're going to face in terms of getting where you need to go, in terms of what your customers are asking for, will pay off. You'll see in that image there, a person's kind of running full speed at their goals, and they're coming up to a gap there over a chasm, and they're either going to have planned for that or it's going to surprise them. And we'd like to say that by taking a little time up front, when you get to that gap, you'd either build a bridge over that in order to get to your goal, and avoid those preventable gaps and pitfalls, so you're successful more of the time. I'd like to argue also that it would save your team time and money. You know, you could run off in many different directions, just going as fast as you can to see how far you can get, and then reaching that endpoint, and then starting over and doing that multiple times. But I would say that if you do that too many times, you're going to burn through a lot of time and money. Yes, you'd be learning some things along the way, but to be successful, and oftentimes our team doesn't have the luxury of trying many things. So we have to be really planful about things to avoid a lot of rework. So that's what we're going to talk to today, why it makes sense to spend a little time up front. With that, we're going to take a poll to find out, you came to this conference and this presentation with a certain mindset. Data can be used for many different things: learning analytics, research, compliance. You can see the list here on the slides. We're going to ask you a poll to get a sense for, when you think about data source selection, where are you coming from? And I'm going to see if I can do this from right there. Okay, so we're just going to take a few seconds, like 30 seconds, to have you weigh in on what your perspective is here. And we'll see if that tells us anything. And you might have multiple main areas of interest, but we're asking you to select one today that's top of mind today. Okay, we're just going to go 10 more seconds. We're asking for decisive participants today. Okay, I'm going to end it right now. And so as we look at it, predominantly, or the largest chunk, is learning analytics, and that's great. I think we're going to get at a little bit of analytics toward the end, and there's some other application integration. There's other things represented here. We're going to talk later on about 4 particular use cases and what we did with those, and hopefully they'll be relevant. And if there's time, we can take questions on other things that you want to talk about. So thank you for that. I'm going to stop sharing and continue. And okay, great. So I want to run through very quickly here some considerations for data source selection, because all data sources aren't created equal. First thing that might be important is latency. It's a big word for how fresh does your data need to be in order to reach your use case. You know, there's an increasing need for real-time data available instantaneously to go on to the next step or to do something in the moment. But there's also cases still to be made for daily, weekly, less frequent refreshes of the data. How dynamic is your data? How often does it change? This is a real consideration you should look at up front. The completeness of your data. Is it really all in one nice little package? You point your query to it and out comes the results you need and you're done? Or does it need to be combined with other data sources, either one or multiple? And what does that mean? The other thing is, we've listed a couple of things there, the Minnesota Common Data Layer, the Splunk lookup tables. Oftentimes we've had to take our data source and not only just use it as it is, but transform it in some way or enrich it before it really will meet our needs. So the completeness of the data is really a consideration that you should count the cost for at the beginning. Access. Sometimes your data source will contain sensitive information. I've listed HIPAA and FERPA there. And knowing whether or not the people working with that data, as well as the customers being able to access that data is critical. If there's going to be restrictions placed on them, taking those into account up front so you don't have any surprises later is important. Not only that, but the delivery method you hope to use, the dashboards, the reports, the process. Will people have any restrictions placed on them there? And will you be able to take that data source and give it the proper security that it requires all along the way? So I think access is another consideration that the data source helps drive. Accuracy. Can you trust that data? We had a case on the Canvas side where we were able to tap into the clickstream data on that people, when they use their desktop or their laptop or whatever was being captured, but we didn't have the mobile usage data. So we just had to understand, would this be viewed as an accurate projection of the situation, or is it missing that data enough to really taint the results? What about other reports that your organization relies on as sources of truth? If you come out with your analysis, will it be perceived as accurate? And will it be, is it something that will cast a shadow either on your results or the other data source results? Something to consider. Also in Canvas, there's a course-based focus versus a user-based focus. And oftentimes, depending on what you're looking at, will either produce things that appear accurate to your customers or are inaccurate to your customers. Accuracy is a big thing to consider. Ease of use. You can have the perfect data source, but if it's impossible to access, or if there's such a steep learning curve to understand what's in it, that can be an effect you want to take into account as well. Oftentimes, the learning curve of the tools needed to access the data are also present, and they need to be considered as part of using that data. We have aspirations to use different data sources more, but oftentimes we're not able to do that because we don't have enough time before we have to produce a result. I think it's fair to say that we're no longer working with your mother's or your father's spreadsheet anymore. We're talking about manipulating massive amounts of data, and not everybody's skilled in working with that. So I think ease of use there with the massive amounts of data that have to be used and done accurately is something to be considered as well. This last topic here is just fit within your organization. If you go down a particular path, but everybody and your entire organization is going a different one, that's possible. But I think it's just making a conscious decision of going with a different tool or a different data source. You may be going it alone until others adopt that. It's still maybe the right decision, but really it is a good thing to consider. Cost sometimes plays into it, both with licensing of tools as well as storage costs. There may be other costs there that are different depending on which data source you choose. So considering that is also pretty vital. Two more, and then we're going to take another poll. Operational sustainability. It's easy to do something once, but really oftentimes we're asked to replicate that and then to scale it as more people adopt it, adding additional scopes. And then what about the administration that your team is burdened with? Taking all of this into consideration up front, again, makes you better prepared to not only do this once, but to make it successful over time. The last thing I want to talk about is bringing it back to the customer. I think we can tap into a data source, we can do our work, we can get over those gaps, we can produce visuals, metrics, analytics, but then if we show it to our customers and they don't understand it because the data source drove a particular type of analysis or it is really not capable of producing what the customer wants, that's really a tragic situation from the standpoint of going through a lot of effort or whatever to produce something that is not meeting customer needs. So that was really quick, but I covered a lot of considerations that our team has looked at for the projects we're going to share later. And right now I'm going to go to another poll here. So basically, of all the considerations we talked about, what is a consideration of high importance to a project in your organization or your area of interest that jumps out at you when you've heard us speak today? So I'm going to launch that poll. And again, go ahead and weigh in on that. Again, many of these might be important for you, but it'll be interesting to see what people are wrestling with. Okay. Still ramping up here. Great, 80%. Okay, going. I'm ending it right now. Okay, I'm going to share the results. We have a lot of people spread out here. Sustainability, it looks like it has the largest chunk. No, actually accuracy. Accuracy is good. Sustainability is good. This may come into play later when we get into the discussion part of our presentation, but thank you for providing your input right now. And give me 1 second here. I'm going to turn it over to Luke Oldenburg to take us through the next set of slides. Thanks.
So I'm not actually surprised by that response because everybody has slightly different needs, and we'll get into, I kind of have a full list here of the potential data sources that you'd be looking into, and there's going to be pros and cons for each one of these. So just to quickly kind of break down each one of these, the one that everybody's familiar with, that user interface and the reports that are part of Canvas built in, benefits there, ease of access, really easy to get up and running and doesn't take much to interpret those. The downsides that you're going to have with that are not always comprehensive, and then there's going to be some gaps in data. Also, you might run into some potential scope issues, which we'll actually bring up when we talk about some of the individual projects that we had to take a look at. Then rolling into the Canvas API. This is a great resource because it's a very comprehensive data. It works well on an ad hoc basis in terms of ease of use because you can pick and choose what exactly you're interested in looking. I would say that one of the bigger downsides with using the Canvas APIs, there's a bit of a knowledge base that you need to develop before you can effectively use it. And then the scale can also be a little bit difficult to manage. That might require some development effort from one of your teams, especially if you're trying to gather institutional knowledge or insights. Then taking a look at Canvas data services, live events as most people would refer to them as. We actually use this quite a bit in our different projects. We like it a lot because it's great for a lot of the operational metrics, which are the things that, especially early on, we've been very focused on. One of the downsides that you're going to have there is it doesn't capture everything that's going on within your system. It's more focused on user interactions, particularly on the learning analytics side of things. And so you're not going to be able to always capture all of the administrative actions that you might be interested in, whether that's some of the administrative changes that are going on, things of that nature. And so just something to be aware of when we were using live events. Then moving into the Canvas data portal, there's a lot going on here. The great thing obviously is that you have a ton of data that's available here. And so it really is capturing almost everything in the system. I will say that doesn't capture a handful of things. And this is one of those break it down, understand what you're working with before you dig too deep into it and choose it as your tool. But you will notice things like you might run into some calendar events or scheduler things that aren't showing up. You might miss some syllabus information, e-portfolios, there's random little use cases out there that if you were trying to decide to use Canvas data as your tool of choice, you might run into some gaps there. I'd also say that the big challenge that I think a lot of people are going to run into with this is it's an enormous amount of data. We're talking millions of rows in each of these tables, depending on the size of your institution. We're quite big, so that is always going to be a challenge for us. And so you're going to need some type of database management tool. The other thing that can be a potential downside with Canvas data is the latency that you're going to experience. If you've ever interacted with that data, you'll notice that it's going to be in that 24 to 36 hour old kind of interface there. And so just be aware that it might not always be the best option for some of your operational reporting, but it might be something that works out extremely well for some of your research purposes or things of that nature. Then moving into UDP, talk about Unizin while we're at this conference here. So the UDP is, again, very similar to the things that you're looking at with Canvas data. It's a very rich resource. There's a lot of detail that's out there. The potential downsides that you're going to run into are that it's architected more as a research data store. So again, kind of running into that same operational issue if you're trying to use it for those purposes. And you're also going to run into some of the same latency issues that we see with Canvas data. So because we're actually pulling in Canvas data into UDP, you have that delay that you have, that 24 to 36 hours. And then you also have the additional delay that's going to be the actual pulling of that data as it gets picked up by the UDP. The other thing that I'll mention there is that it's not always easy to give out filtered access or scoped access to all this data that shows up in the UDP. So sharing that or making it available to different local administrators, deans, whatever it might be a little bit more difficult than you're anticipating. Then we've also got the Unizin Data Warehouse. That's been something we've used in the past. I will say that our main concerns with that have been concerns about it being deprecated, and then also about it, if not deprecated, being reimagined. And so some of the potential costs and changes that might go on there. Then we have our own local data sources, our common data layer. And that you can kind of think of as our integration hub, where we've got information coming from a variety of different sources within the university, whether that's our SIS or any of our other central systems. We do reference that in some of the projects that we have. And so just understand that that's a unique tool to us, and a resource that we have will help us in this discussion. And then the last thing that I wanted to mention, and a potential game changer here, is the existence or future existence, I might want to say, of Canvas Data 2. And so similar to Canvas data. We were talking about how robust of a resource that is. Canvas data 2, we're expecting very similar things, but I think the biggest game changer there is the difference in latency that we're expecting to see there, going down from that 24 to 36 hour latency down to around 4 hours. And so that makes it much more functional as a potential operational tool for us. And with that, I'll turn it over to Jim just to start talking about some of these projects that we've used these data sources for.
Yeah, Jeff, you want to yeah, so we've got a handful of case studies that we've been working on and using different data sources for, and making different decisions about how we approach it depending on what we need to do. The first one that we have here is we are currently in a internal audit of Canvas, and there's a number of requirements that we've been given to have meet compliance for what can be traced and tracked in terms of user activity or usage of the LMS. And we particularly have been given 4 key metrics, and the one that we're going to dig into here is that we needed to be able to trace and monitor and know proactively if grade changes are being made, who's making those grade changes, and specifically how can we get something that would be anomalous or suspicious in some way. Now, when we sat down to say how are we going to approach this data, it wasn't necessarily that that real time. We ended up, as it says here, using Canvas live events for this. It wasn't necessarily that real time was the main driver to that. And in a lot of cases, that's going to be your big plus for live events. But you can, for example, look at the API and get a great gradebook history results through the API and see those kind of grade changes. But the only way we could do that was to look at every single course. And for reporting, you know the specific course you want to go to, you know what data you need. For reporting, that's great. You can just go to the API and you can get that data. But if you need to be able to actively monitor for something that could be anomalous or shouldn't follow a standard pattern, just going through every single course at the university and getting the gradebook history is not going to be useful there. So we kind of settled on live events being that a stream that we could look through and find events that seemed out of the ordinary. And we would need to marry this data with our internal knowledge. And the key thing there was, I'll get to that on the next slide, really. But we're marrying this with our internal data about who's the instructors registered with the course. So the needs enrichment, it was straightforward to use because we do a lot of live events here. It's entirely internal, so there's not key problems with who is going to access this data. And this point of understandability to customers, we were the internal customer for this data, so it was not an issue that we had to consider too much about that. Jeff, you want to advance that? So as a result of this project, what we've done is taken all of the grade change events that come out of Canvas on any given day, and that covers all of our system campuses. And we have a filter that we run on that. It's this custom development internal here. So we just have an application that filters that. And the goal is to filter out basically, what do you expect a thing to happen? So an instructor who is the registered instructor for that course, and according to our SIS system is the person who's supposed to be grading, we can just filter that out. That's still reportable via the API, but for the point of getting to something that's alertable, we're able to filter that out. We also have learned that there are units that have the exact opposite case, and we can build different kinds of filters to meet, for example, one of our units that the instructor is never the one that assigns the grades. So we can do sort of a reverse filter in that case. And so what we've gotten this to now is we've basically just built a large data store of events that meet our filter criteria, with the goal of taking like a term's worth of data or such and doing some further analysis on it so we can build a set of criteria these are those things that we're going to report on, these are alert on, and then we will be able to build alerts proactive from events that sort of meet this criteria to notify the organization and have that be an automated process for us. All right, Jeff, you can. For the second case that we have currently ongoing is a new program that is starting up with one of our system campuses that is a sort of an accelerated health sciences degree program. And the key to that program is a engagement platform that will do nudges, that'll give badges for completion of things and track students' progress and give nudges about, oh, you as a student have X number of assignments coming up. These are the due dates for them. Hey, you should be paying attention to this kind of stuff. So as you log into this platform, it knows that you should be expected to be doing stuff, and instructors can program these in to pop up at various times, and it keeps track of the students' progress through their courses. And so the key thing that they need to know here is, at the moment, at any given time, has students completed their assignments? So the bullet point to need enrichment here is, I was just getting to that. So they need to know what the data that comes out of Canvas in a live event for something like an assignment completion isn't always going to include the full details of the assignment or how many points it's worth, or even sometimes we have to marry SIS data to this so that it doesn't know at the time, it has a Canvas user ID, but it doesn't have a SIS ID, or the same thing for the course. It has a Canvas ID, but it doesn't always have an SIS ID. The system that people are going to log into that is going to consume this data doesn't want to know about the specifics of the LMS. It's not an LTI, it's not integrated in any way there. It's a separate tool, and it doesn't need to know about the SIS. So the data, that last point on there, somewhat understandable to customers, is relevant here too. The data isn't really in a form coming out of Canvas that is immediately understood by the consuming application. So we need to enrich that to make it make sense to this third-party tool. So we have had to build an entire pipeline that takes all of the events that come out of Canvas for an assignment being completed or a submission, filter it down to the 100-odd students total that are part of this program, supply the necessary data that this third-party system will need to interpret that and send it on, which I think I basically covered our next slide as a part of that. But if you want to jump there. So this is currently just coming out of user acceptance testing in the past couple of weeks, and we're bringing it to full-time launch with very much a minimum viable product, as Jeff has noted here, for the fall term. But this will be something that we're really hoping to look at how we can repurpose this sort of filter and enrichment process on the live events coming out of Canvas to use for all kinds of other programs in the future, to supply real-time info about completion and student progress through a course. And I think I'll turn it back over to Luke to cover our other cases.
Thank you, Jim. So the other thing, and I know this is a common issue, especially for folks like myself who are LMS administrators, academic integrity concerns. So you'll have an instructor that reaches out to your support team, or we're lucky enough to have a couple of business offices, our Student Conflict Resolution Center, as well as our Office for Community Standards, which kind of serve as the middleman between us and either a student that has a issue or an instructor that has an issue. But the goal here is to provide those offices with accurate information about what is going on in the LMS and what kind of takeaways that they can have from anything that's going on within the system. And so for us, the things that we're taking a look at, completeness obviously is one of the biggest ones. You want to make sure that if you are having a student that is saying XYZ happened in the system and you have an instructor that's contradicting them, that you have accurate and complete data and you're getting everything that you need to make a good assessment. The other thing there is because we're working with folks who might not be as tech savvy, understandability for those customers is a huge part of it. Just making sure that you're speaking the same language and there's nothing lost in the translation, no technical jargon that ends up being lost there. And then again, operational sustainability, a big thing for us, just making sure that, you know, if we have, and it tends to be cyclical just with the flow of a term, right at the end of a term, we have some instructor reaching out and we have a number of these cases all popping up at the same time, make sure that it's something that we can replicate and do without a terrible burden there. And so the source that we ended up choosing was Canvas Lab Events. And we've also got all of that data indexed into a Splunk instance. And then, you know, because we want to have some of that completeness and accuracy, we would regularly do kind of a verify and check either by going into the Canvas UI or by accessing the Canvas API. Jeff, if you'd go to the next slide here. And so, you know, kind of what we came up with is, like I said, using Splunk to take in all of that Canvas Live event data. And so we found that, you know, this is usually a unique case. It can vary from students having questions about, you know, were they trying to access some resource? Did they actually attempt this quiz? To, you know, we've had instances where an instructor accidentally gives a student TA access, and what did they actually look at in the course? So it's going to be a very ad hoc type of report that you're going to be giving these groups, just because you need to be flexible for whatever that unique question is that they're asking you. And so Splunk gave us that ability to look up by user, look up by course, look up by different contexts, what exactly was going on there. And you know, one of the difficulties that I mentioned before with potentially using Canvas data is that it doesn't have everything going into there. And so what we had to do is actually enrich this, and in a fairly simple way, actually, because you know, we want to add some of these lookup tables to make it easier for us to search for particular actions. These are things like, you know, those common IDs for particular courses that we've got, or subaccounts that we've got, you know, different things that make it easier for us to perform the searches in the context that are needed for us. A couple things to know about all of these academic integrity things, and I think people kind of struggle with this, especially people on the non-technical side, because they don't understand what you can and cannot capture. Making sure that when we are speaking with these offices, make sure that they know that a lot of time it's going to be unlikely that we capture definitive proof that XYZ happened in a course. We can only kind of get an impression of, okay, well, obviously the student was in the system, they were viewing these pages, they were interacting with this content, but we can't tell intent a lot of times with some of the things that are captured in these server interactions. And for that reason, whenever we are sharing this type of data with somebody, we make sure that we have a data disclaimer. And so you can read kind of the abbreviated version. We've got a little bit more that we add along with that that's specific to the university, but essentially what we're trying to tell them is, hey, here's what we're seeing in the system. It might not be a completely accurate 100% view of what we're looking at here, but understand, you know, here's our interpretation of what we're taking a look at, and you know, be understanding that there might be some things that we weren't able to capture. Another thing that we do with some of these academic integrity concerns that we can leverage Splunk for is actually proactively monitoring some of our students who also happen to be sub-account administrators. So you might have somebody with some type of elevated access, and again, using some of the data that we're able to capture from our SIS, and when we know that there's going to be student enrollments, using that data to create specific monitors for course interactions using that elevated access. Jeff, if you could move to the next project. And then the last one, and I think this is probably going to be one of the ones that people are particularly interested, because, you know, taking a look at some of those learning analytics. So for us, we have a lot of demand for understanding what tools are used, because we have deans or administrators that are, interested in the tools that are being used, whether the licensing or the seats that they've purchased are going to be used up, or if there's concerns there about running over their licensing limit or seat limit like that. So the next thing that we're taking a look at here is actual interactions with, the voice threads, the Kalturas, Turnitin, Proctorio, any of those different tools, and seeing how they end up being used. And so the things that we had to consider here was access, accuracy, want to make sure that you're accurately representing everything, operational sustainability again, because this is something that regularly gets asked for. So, people are interested not only in how it's been being used from the beginning of time, but how are these things actively being used in a course this semester or this academic year, things of that nature. And so making sure that was something that we could replicate fairly easily was important to us. And so again, we're using Canvas live events plus some of our local source data and putting that all into our instance of Splunk. And that allows us to, again, create some flexibility there. I did want to point out that UDP was something that we had considered. And for some of the limitations that we talked about before with scoping some of the access and some of the learning that would need to go on there, it was something that we haven't chose at this point. And I could very easily see us wanting to do that in the future as that continues to be something that we develop our own skills on, and Unizin develops a little bit more so that we can get some of that scoped access for. Jeff, if you go to the next slide, please. And so the results for us, Canvas reports can be helpful. There's that LTI report that I'm sure many of you have seen before, but it doesn't always grab the correct scope. A lot of the things that you're going to be seeing there are the point of that integration. So a lot of times we have things that are installed at the root level. We don't always get the particular context that we're concerned about. And so by using Canvas live events, we can actually look for within that metadata of the transactional events of people accessing or launching a particular tool, we can find out, hey, it was in this course, it was done at this particular time, it was the same student that used it 10 times in this particular day, and we can run some of these reports fairly easily. And so, the types of things that people are interested in are, total tool usage. So, of everything that might be used in this particular sub account for, our particular college, what are the things that are being used the most? And that's based off of, the different counts of events. It can be calling out the individual users that are launching these tools, the courses, all of those different contexts. Splunk gives you quite a bit of flexibility there. I will say that one of the challenges that you'll probably find pretty quickly is that there are some tools that don't always jive with what you're trying to do. So many of you are probably taking a look at things like the redirect tool, and you can't really figure out when people are using it. And that's because some of the naming conventions and the way that they just actually get created in those contexts can be difficult to follow. So just something to be aware of, that there are going to be some tools that aren't captured always in the same exact way. And then the big benefit here, with UDP, there's visualizations and some great ones at that, but it doesn't always help, like I said, trying to share that out to some of these specific units that we care about. And so Splunk being able to create embedded reports is something that worked out fairly well for us. And Jeff, if you want to just share that last slide that we got there associated with this. So this is just a simple embedded report. Splunk allows you to embed these reports. And so if you are already doing the query on the front end and you have scoped it down to the particular level of access, then you can kind of leverage Canvas enrollments as the way to separate who should and shouldn't have access to it. So this report that we're looking at here is just a simple account of people's interactions with particular tools within one of our let me see, that's actually UMD. So one of our campuses that we've got. And so another thing, small little thing, but can play a big part in interpreting some of this data is understanding what counts as an event. And so understanding, if a student launches Proctorio, does that show up as a single event, or is there a refresh of a page that actually means it's 2 accounts or triple counted or things like that? So there is some exploration that needs to go on there. But For us, Splunk gave us a lot of flexibility with that and made it something that we could save reports, save these embedded things, and make it easy to share out.
All right. So I'm going to let people kind of look at the conclusions here. Actually, we'll cover them really quickly, then we'll jump into the chat, make sure we covered all of that. So from my perspective, data source planning for project does save time. And I always encourage our team to take a look at many data sources, even if we're unfamiliar with them, because things are always changing. What may not be relevant today might be relevant tomorrow. Luke, you had a thought there?
Yeah, and maybe it's because I'm a BA and I'm often trying to deliver some of these things to folks, making sure that these things actually are understandable to the end consumer. So whether that means you need to add the asterisks that you've got out there, or you need to figure out ways to enrich the data or rename tables or whatever it might be, just making sure that once you have handed that report or that document over, that the people that are receiving it understand what they're taking a look at.
Cool. Jim?
And the observations that I have here are, thinking about the level of complexity that comes with kind of combining multiple data sources together. If you think just, with just one where you have maybe database tables, how joins can get more and more complicated as you go. Imagine then you want to add in real-time flow of data for one thing and pulling out from an on-prem data source that has information that's particular to your university. The complexity of sort of joining all those things together can really scale up. And also, you'll see that everything we've talked about, all our case studies are really stuff that we've worked with live events, but we try to be very careful to not, the old analogy of when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. They're not the right data for everything. And I mean, I think Luke even alluded that for the LTI usage ones, it may be that UDP is the better source in the long run, but at the time when we were doing it, it wasn't there for us with what we needed, and we didn't have all the expertise to use it. But that just because you've used one data source for a few things, keep in mind as you approach a new project that those they may not be appropriate in the same way.
Thanks. The rest was left over for questions. Have people? I haven't been able to see so well here. Have people been answering or chatting? Are there some? Go ahead.
There was one question in the chat about embedded reports. And so when you're creating these embedded reports, essentially all you're doing is you have a report that you have saved. So you run your query, you save that as a report, and then in that actual reporting settings interface, there's the ability to schedule it regularly. So, the ones I was just talking about in terms of external tool usage, refresh on a day-to-day basis, so every 24 hours, and then it refreshes in that particular context. In that case, a Canvas course shell that we've got. If you aren't seeing that, I believe it is something that is managed by a Splunk admin, and so it may be an instance of not having that particular functionality be enabled for you. I remember I had to talk to some of our local Splunk administrators to get that enabled for us.
I see Allison here is asking about some of the pain points in mashing up data amongst multiple sources, and some of the solutions. I think we continue to just kind of butt our head against it, and when every time we need a new data point, it makes it a little bit more complicated. I think a lot of it depends on how you internally manage data too, particularly if you're going to use something like your SIS or something like that. We've been really at University of Minnesota actively getting more and more data sources into what we call the common data layer, mentioned a couple times here, and that allows us to at least minimize the number of different places we have to reach out to data, because if we can use a tool to combine it all into one interface at the common data layer, that has a standardization that can really help in that case.
I think we're down to like our last minute here. We've really appreciated you taking the time here today. Our names are here. If you do want to reach out to us, we'd be happy to take those any questions you might have. But I think our presentation is downloadable and it's recorded. So really thank you for your time today, and I hope you're enjoying the rest of the summit too.